So for me, dating, I'm a product of the jungle, so to speak. Um, when it comes to dating, there's never really been a discernible structure. There's never really been a time where I thought or said to myself, "This is dating." Um, it's more or less exposure to certain environments, different places over time, where there were also women, and dating sort of came about as a result of exposure. And that can come up in the strangest of places. Anywhere, to be honest. Anywhere is a place where the seeds of romance can start to grow. And this has been shown to me personally in some pretty strange ways. Like, I used to play World of Warcraft, a place where you would figure is pretty much devoid of romance or dating. A place where you are playing these completely fictional avatars that are just barely parts of you at all. Yet, from that environment, I met and dated more than once. And I remember how that all happened. It actually kind of happened the same way it always happens: exposure, just in certain environments. And dating has changed over the years. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious to anybody who pays attention. Um, the whole point of dating as even a thing, has drastically changed over the years. I mean, exposure was once a matter of a relatively small geographic area. And the whole series of exchanges between two people were dramatically different. But one thing is true for human beings, at least there's a thing that I can assume is true based off of all that I've seen so far. We have always been almost like spellcasters, in a way. I mean, the entirety of what we do as human beings is rather hypnotic to each other. Not always, not for everybody. Not everybody is susceptible to everybody's spell, so to speak. And some of us have a more universal appeal, and some of us have more of a niche appeal. Some of us can go just about anywhere, and chemistry will happen, and for some of us, not. But it is definitely true to say that in this modern era, primacy is in feeling. Dating has definitely become more of an endeavor that is just completely steeped in feeling. I mean, it really is, you know, the beginning and the end, because practical circumstances obviously carry much, much less weight. I mean, practical circumstances were once uh, viewed very differently. I mean, we still talk about practical circumstances. I mean, we still, rattle off our position. We still look as though we're in a certain position in the world. We act like we're in certain positions in the world. We still try to convey those things with pride, and we still try to talk about those things as if they are um, important aspects in dating. But they definitely take less primacy than just the raw chemistry between two people. And in a world with so much exposure, I mean, we're all exposed to millions of people theoretically at any given point. I've started to think that when two people do get together, it's actually better because you're in a pool. Let's say if you're operating on the internet, you know, you are exposed to just a huge group of people at all times. And you are exposed to so many different personality types over an extended period of time. And if you do meet somebody where there's actually something there, I think that that's actually more potent in terms of compatibility. At least that's what I've seen. And obviously, meeting on the internet can lead to catastrophic results as well. Nothing is ever 100%, but yeah, over time, for me, dating, I mean, taking people on first dates and stuff like that, the actual standard format of dating, for me, lasted as long as maybe high school. Um, and I liked that format back then, you know. It just, it was something that relatively quickly went away as I got further and further into the jungle. You could say I was once a pretty hedonistic dude. Uh, and it's like I've said, I didn't honestly plan to live past 30 until I turned about 30. And when it comes to dating today, honestly, even when I see with my parents and when I see the best relationships, and even in my own relationships, I mean, people want to connect on a level that's just far, far deeper and significant in a way that makes it singular. And there's that classic, I guess you could say, sort of a cliche at this point, where people become sort of friends and lovers. And that you just really can't get away from that. And if you treat people like friends, then they are friends. If you treat people as if there is this lover component, I think there's obviously a much deeper possibility for how far a connection can go. And like I've said, it's all the way down to making people, which is a pretty profound thing, to be honest. And there's degrees of chemistry. There's probably a large chunk of people we can, you know, have perfectly fine chemistry with. But that's just, I don't think that's enough for people these days. I don't think it's enough for people to have, I guess you could call a common chemistry, you know. Because if there's 50 people who you like, you know, who are fine, that's just not gonna cut it. You know what I mean? It's just not gonna do something deeper. And I was always the sort of person who thought marriage was just a contract, just sort of a dead thing. Um, for at least the first 25 years of my life, and that's how I would say it to women that I dated. I was like, you know, I don't know if that's necessary. You know, I would say that it's a contract, and you know, it might actually cheapen the situation. It might actually make it less than it is. It might ruin the natural flow. And in retrospect, that was a guy saying, I don't really love you like that. You know what I mean? In the end, I think it was various ways of saying that. And we have this body of love stories that has made it through the generations. And we even have love stories among our peers, you know. And there is something about that is inescapably appealing. The love story. And I get it. I mean, of course, we want to be able to be like, to tell this story. When you have something like that, it makes it easier to remember why you're there. And when it comes to love, like, even if it's the truest and most real love that there is, I think it's greatly helped by also being a good person. Because in those moments when this intense love isn't at its normal intensity, to fill in those gaps, you also have to be a good person. Because if you're not, those gaps won't be filled with something that will keep the relationship growing and alive. But if you are a decent human being, in those moments where things are a little bit more difficult, you'll have something there as almost sort of a glue that actually helps the both of you come further together. And I think it's a pretty easy determination to make, to say that people who generally aren't that great of people on the whole don't seem to be the sort of people who fall madly in love and, end up with the proverbial happy ever after. There seems to be a pretty strong tether to also at least being a decent person. I mean, that seems to be a common thing. I mean, there's, your there's your Bonnie and Clyde situations, you know, and those would obviously be exceptions. I mean, you can still have an insanely potent, undying love for somebody and be criminals. I mean, but I don't think that that's going to go as deep as it can go, let's say. And it's not specifically criminals, it's just two people who are at a point in life where they're not decent yet, or let's say, good human beings yet, are going to treat love completely differently anyway. Because, especially this day and age, we are definitely at a time where power is it's up there on the list of things that we notice. And that's something I've talked about before, the way love, as it arrives, it can't help but be noticed as power too. And you're not really going to be able to unsee that, especially at first, especially if you're unfamiliar with love, especially if it's kind of a new thing and it just kind of rolls up on you. All of a sudden there it is, and all of a sudden you were a person who was basically in control for forever, for most of your life. And maybe you had moments where you kind of lost control a bit, but you learned and you got better at it. Suddenly you fall in love with somebody, and you don't have any control over that. And if you're a rebellious person, I mean, you add that on top of that, you're going to find yourself in quite a situation there. And then if you add on top of that, maybe your parents didn't have the best situation, or maybe you were surrounded by a number of situations that weren't the best examples, and you do fall in love. You're going to have to go through quite a process to even be able to get your hand on the doorknob to open the door. Like, you're going to see the door there, but all around the door, you're going to see the things that you can't help but view as on the other side before you even walk through it. It's like the door is surrounded by a wall of images. because of everything that's come before, because of the inescapable view that there is a transfer of power going on. And I mean, that's a tight spot. You know what I mean? It doesn't, it is that complicated, and at the same time, it's very simple. It's very simple if you just go with it and take it where it's going to lead you. You know, it's simple if you can manage to trust, which is really like the key here. And part of loving somebody, of course, is that massive wealth of trust. And part of that trust comes from the fact that they are a decent human. I mean, there's all sorts of things that we look for when we're around people that are cues that tell us whether or not we can trust this person. And we're, like I said, we're very good spellcasters. Like the words that we use, the way that we move, the way we dress, the way we bulk up our appearance a bit, the way we want to make a good first impression, the way we put our best foot forward, the way some people even have material or canned lines, or almost like a stand-up show, or like a persona to adopt when going on dates. Like, it's all a focal point of spellcasting, hypnosis. It's this thing that almost is a attempt to corral chemistry in the best way possible. And it's it's kind of a weird oxymoron in a way, because I mean, man, it's almost like one of the initial phases of dating is trying to go that route. You know what I mean? Like trying very hard, just in general, for the concept of dating. Like, some people go out and do things for the idea of dating, to hypothetically meet somebody. And then there's other people who eventually reach this point where they try to put that out of mind and just go out to have fun, go out to live their life, to just try to ignore the concept of dating as much as humanly possible, in the hope that the person of their dreams will appear. Like, we play these like pretty elaborate, even games of self-hypnosis on ourselves for this thing, because one of the biggest fears and one of the biggest concerns and worries that we have is that perception that what is going on is an exchange of value and an exchange of power. And it is inescapably that. But that's almost like the former view that I had as, marriage as a contract. That there is the very practical elements, but you gotta you gotta be able to view it in a far more simple way, and you gotta be able to just sort of let things happen when they happen. And that's not easy to do, because another thing that's very attractive in general as human beings is praise and adoration and attention, let's say. And attention in these things and praise in these things are certainly better from certain people, from some over others, but at other times, mass praise and mass attention and affection from strangers is perfectly fine too. Anytime that we need to feel something, we have access to a huge group of people that we may be able to get these things from in a very direct way. I mean specifically the internet by this, because the other version is obviously out in the wild, in the jungle. And that's a little bit more opaque, because while you're out there, you're not 100% sure that what you're getting is these things, this praise and, sort of a positive attention and stuff like that. But on the internet, you can very clearly and directly get that, pretty much on call for men and women. But that's that thing where I think that we always have this thing in us that wants something more. And that little spot there, that little space, is dying to be filled with something maybe both permanent and sublime. But this sort of scheme that we have with the internet and these things sort of surrounding attention and praise and these things, by nature, is like a wave. It has to be refilled from time to time. And sometimes that's a good replacement for dating. Sometimes that's a good little placeholder for romantic energies. It's not the full potency of being madly in love, and being, I guess sort of one item with a person. But it does offer you more control. And it does offer you a one-way exchange of power, in a way. And it costs all parties very little, while at the same time still offering something. And we're still figuring this out, really, as a society, And I can't even really imagine, like, what it's like to be married. Like, my brother, my older brother, he's been married for over 10 years, and he doesn't even use social media. Like, he doesn't use the internet to connect with people. And neither does his wife. I mean, they use the internet, obviously, for all sorts of things, but and they did this not for their marriage. They did it as people, just because it wasn't really their thing. So for them, it's not really a concern. But I imagine for most people, having access to so many people at all times, I wonder how that is for a marriage. I genuinely do. Because I'm obviously not married, and I know what it's like on the age of the internet, even with dating, even with the constant availability of myself and how that's affected women that I've dated, even having access to various apps and social media while I wasn't actively courting anybody or any sort of affection or praise in that way. Just my presence out there and the fact that I was dating somebody and these things being public knowledge was more than enough for, let's say, other women to actively try to penetrate the relationship. And I noticed that over time, even though I wasn't actively pursuing it, it wasn't even in my mind to pursue anybody else. There was still this effort to penetrate the relationship at all times, almost, it seemed, to where I started to pull myself back from the internet just in general, because just by exposure, it's almost like it's a sort of availability, even if it's innocuous. So I can imagine in a marriage how that would be, especially if your life is basically devoted to the internet, But from what I've seen in relationships, in good relationships, there's a sense that it's permanently walled off to other people, like it's impenetrable. And I guess I didn't give out that vibe back then, that it was completely impenetrable. Maybe it was an image that made it appear as though I wasn't as committed as I could be, which I wasn't, obviously, because I wasn't married. And I'm not the sort of person who talks about my relationships in a public way, but it was just interesting as somebody who likes to observe in general and take stock just what that looks like, you know. And I couldn't help but think of how this could so easily get people into trouble. Like if I were actually in a marriage like that, I'm I'm fairly certain that I would either have to establish very strong walls, um, so that everybody knows that there is no way to penetrate this, or just remove myself from those environments in general. Because when you go to clubs and when you go out into the wild, so to speak, those are almost places where it's known ahead of time that you're doing that to potentially run into somebody and meet somebody. You know, those are sort of places where the environment is part of the package to the idea that you might meet somebody. But social media doesn't really have, unless it's a dating app. Like a dating app has that feel, obviously, where the intent is to meet somebody. But social media is more innocuous, at least in terms of its image, and at least in terms of what you can claim to be there for. You know, you can say you're there for friends or for anything really, except the pursuit of the romantic. And it's just a sort of an interesting dynamic because it's sort of a newer dynamic. It's like always being out there in a way. It's almost like a show of availability, which is interesting. It's interesting to have to deal with. And I really do think that people who meet in environments where there are a huge amount of you and there is an actual genuine connection, I just tend to think that that's going to be stronger because it's passed through different levels of screening, and you're aware of a much deeper plethora of personality types, and this certain connections can genuinely be felt to be different and stand out. And dating in general, I mean, it definitely goes through phases. I mean, it's almost like an approval machine in a way, you know. Because when do you decide that you want to get married, or when do you become a person who dates to marry? And if you're somebody who dates to marry, it changes how you date dramatically. And there's this weird thing too, where I've always thought, like, if you went into dating with a preconceived notion to marry, and this might just be me, but I've always been a fan of, like, genuine spontaneity. You know, I've always been a sort of fan of love just happening just like that. And once you find that love, and it is truly that, that's when you get married. But there's this other thing where if you date to marry, would you not prematurely marry somebody because that's what you're looking for, you know? If that makes sense, it's almost like you might end up marrying somebody with whom the chemistry is possibly not what it could be, and you might make a mistake versus running into somebody that makes you want to get married. The distinction is subtle, but to me it makes a difference, you know, because it's also part of the love story element. When you meet sort of serendipitously, and there's that thing where people have this idea where when you stop looking for something, it suddenly arrives, which is an important part of the love story. It's sort of found its way to the top of how a lot of us view how love happens, you know, when you're least looking for it. there it is. And when you are looking for it, you end up walking down the wrong road. And I can't really stress enough the degree to which we are these spellcasters, and the peak of our spellcasting ability, the peak of our ability to be entities of hypnosis is probably somewhere in our late 20s, maybe mid to lower 20s, up through our 30s. And it's different for men and women. For men, obviously, we seem to peak later, and we seem to, honestly, some of us keep getting more handsome. But for women, it's a whole different game. You know, you have the classic biological clock situation, and I can't imagine that that's easy. You know, that's a huge thing to consider. And would that not perhaps distort your view of dating when you hit a certain age? You know, people don't want to settle, but it's like, man, um, you might have to, you know. And for some reason, and one of the worst things that there is to imagine is the idea of being with somebody forever who you don't have an undying love for. And I speak in these terms because I happen to be, I'm a romantic. I don't know if you can tell, but I happen to be a romantic. And honestly, I couldn't have it any other way. You know, I'm not the sort of person who views somebody as an exchange of power or an exchange of value. I don't even hardly view the practical terms in which you live. I see your soul in a way. And why do we have best friends? Why do we have even just friends whose company we prefer at the exclusion of everybody else because we only have so much time? It's because even in a non-romantic setting, chemistry is a thing. Chemistry is a permanent fixture of human life, and it's the foundation of why we do almost all we do with each other, even despite personal circumstances and the exact position of each of us in the world, or even our positions in society, wealth, all those things. Doesn't seem to matter. Your chemistry with other human beings is the strongest thing that determines your entire relationship with them. And it's not any different romantically. It's just that romantically is another tier. It's another level that just goes further in and into different places. Because the level of a friend stops at a certain level, obviously. But the romantic level continues to reach further and further in. And it requires different things of us. And the hypnosis factor is present in both. And when I say hypnosis, I don't mean that as like a negative term, as if it's, you know, exploitative or manipulative. It's simply what we do, what we are. As we animate, as we exist, we are hypnotic entities. And that's true even for the creatures around us, our pets, cats and dogs, and the animals that we run into. To them, we are hypnotic entities. That's what even domestication is. That's what teaching and learning and training other creatures of the world is. It's a slow hypnosis. And we know that a wild animal, a truly wild animal, keeps that capacity to be wild. And as we domesticate, let's say, a lion, we're always aware of that part of them that at any moment could revert back to its non-hypnotized state, back to its raw animal state. And we fear the same thing with love and romance too, that the hypnosis could break. for whatever reason. And we also have this thing. Let's say you fall madly in love. Let's say you bump into a person and boom, there it is. We unhypnotize ourselves preemptively sometimes by pointing out certain facts of our own existence. For example, say you meet somebody and you're feeling this thing and it's growing. You might say to yourself, because of XYZ, because of this thing, this specific thing about you, this relationship's not possible. It's great, the fact that it exists, and I love that. But because of this thing about me, I'm not gonna, I can't pursue it. It's like a preemptive breaking of the hypnosis, of which you will have to actively keep at bay, because it's going to prey on you. If not for this thing or series of things about you, you might be able to get into this, which is an extremely common thing, especially in this time where we can replace true romantic love with a sort of gimped version with the access that the internet offers. And ladies, I mean, this is I would imagine a tough thing for ladies, especially for ladies. I mean, handsome men, men who have things that draw a large audience surely exist, but there isn't anything quite like the universal draw of the beauty of a woman, and that's for men and women. It's, I'm honestly surprised that everybody's not a lesbian because of the beauty of women and how easily accessible that is. So, women have a much larger ability for a delayed or stunted version of hypnosis, where they're hypnotizing a larger swath of people who remain at a distance, who they're able to manage and keep control, relative control over, for the most part. And you're able to sort of be okay with that, because it gives you some of what you need. It doesn't give you that deep connection, obviously, but you can get some forms of that through different types of friends and different types of relationships. But on the whole, it can kind of exist as a somewhat filled out situation that can make the days go and fill that spot for a little bit. But the trouble with that is time. Time will eventually slowly start to show itself. And this isn't any kind of criticism or any kind of anything. It's an observation of the world in which we live. Time slowly starts to show, and in between those moments, there is the understanding and comprehension that there is something far deeper, yet still out there. And it's hard to get out of your own way sometimes, your own hypnosis on yourself, because a lot of you are quite beautiful, and a lot of you, I can understand the hypnotic effect that you have. But it is true that there is something yet still out there. And it takes a set of stones to get into that. It really does. It takes a set of balls, no pun there, to do that, because you actually have to leave, and this is sort of a strange thing to say, is you actually kind of have to leave yourself behind in a way, because the lifestyle of that sort of gratification from the many, it isn't really compatible with a marriage. At least it doesn't seem that way. It doesn't seem like that would be compatible. So I think women will find in time that that just isn't going to work. It's like almost like you have to choose in a weird way. And it's like I said, we're still figuring all this out. And men and women have very different timelines, very different things that we are able to do, especially in terms of trust. And there is a rule that I've learned about dating. There was somebody who I met once, and I remember telling her that I didn't know the rules. And the reason I said that was because my feelings for her were different and distinct enough to make it to where the rules changed. Because over time, you see enough pattern, enough repetition to where you can develop something that feels something like rules. They aren't actually that, but they can be said that way. And one rule that I learned in that situation is the one thing you don't do with love is say something that questions the validity of its existence, or do something that questions the validity of its existence. Because within the framework of that sort of bond, you can have a pretty large array of disagreements. I mean, you can have arguments and things that come along that will cause you both pain, but in the end, due to the nature of the bond, you are going to come together better than you were. And that's going to happen continuously over time. You end up going through things with each other as human beings, and you just get closer and closer, and the bond gets better and better. But the one thing you don't do is question the validity of the existence of that bond altogether. It's almost like that's the furthest level of magnification. And if you do that, it makes it very difficult to trust you. Because when it comes to a relationship like that, it's less common, those sorts of relationships that are that tight and that easy. So, yeah, that's what I've learned. And you might get one of those. I mean, because within such relationships, you might rebel. You might subconsciously need to do things to test it, which sounds kind of fucked up, but it's true. We kind of do these small things sometimes that test the nature of something, because we say a lot of things to each other and we do a lot of things to each other. But at the end of the day, it's like I said in the past, will I suffer for you? Am I willing to go through things with you and endure? Will these things break us apart? Will this side come out of you that I didn't know about because of things coming up in life and in this relationship? And within that, there may come a time where you say something that questions the validity of how you even feel about that person in the first place. And if that does happen, you can only do it once, and you're going to have to be making it up to that person probably for the rest of your life. And you're never going to be able to forget about that, because that's almost like a before and after type moment. And in dating, it's not even really a relationship worth the name if you don't remember your mistakes and in one form or another, continuously make it up to that person. And that's the strange thing, too. It's like some of us within our hypnotic abilities, we're very good at speaking. And we can say the things that absolutely are the right things to say. But in time, it is, as we sometimes say, it is the actions that bear out the truth.